Hey YouTube, welcome back. Here we got another mini guide. Today we're going to be going over JSON data. So this is whether it's a local JSON file or pulling from like something like a RESTful API. And we're going to show you how to use the JSON utility in order to parse it and put it into C# objects that you can dot into. And as like a little extra, we're going to also do a second request to kind of use the JSON data that we gathered in order to load an image in the center of the screen. So it's going to look something like this when we hit play. We're going to get back some JSON data here. We're then going to parse it and parse out the C# object, and then we're going to load this Ditter's face that the thing is linked to, this Joseph Stein. And yeah, if this is interesting, check it out. Alright guys, so the first thing we're going to do is I'm using just like my standard mini guides project here. I'm going to go into and I'm going to create a new scene. We're just going to call this JSON. Go ahead and open that. We're not going to need a directional light. We might as well just get rid of things that we don't really need. I'm going to right click, create a new empty. We're going to call this one code. You can kind of do however like you format your code. This is just for the sample. We're just going to do it in one class. And then I have like a code folder with utility. So I'm going to have a little script here. We're just going to call this Json Reader for now. And you can go ahead and open the JSON Reader. There we go. Okay, so we're not going to need an update function here, so we can get rid of that. We're going to use the start though. And the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to find an endpoint to do. So in most cases, people are going to be querying like a RESTful API. You might have a local file, and that's completely fine. Today we're going to use this endpoint that I just found online that just returns some sample data to us. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to store that endpoint. So it's going to be a public constant string. We're going to call this URL endpoint. And if you're doing RESTful stuff, then you might have a variety of these. You might break up the string. So our address here is actually going to be this this request rest.in website. The API, users, and then user2. So the idea here is that we're going to get a string that will contain some, this is just me like hypothetically writing it down. You get like some data, and then inside the data, if this would organize it, you would have like multiple users sort of thing. So yeah, if I grab this really quick, I'll just kind of show you what it returns. So it's going to return to us this JSON string. It's going to contain some data, and inside it's going to contain an object which has an ID, email, first name, last name, and an avatar link. And that's what we're going to be doing today. You guys can try it a bunch on their website if you just go to the... Okay, so this website, just kind of, this is where we're going to pull it from. It's going to show you a bunch of data that, for this is a list of users, going to return you a bunch of users. We're going to use a single user, which is what our data just looked like. Thing to keep in mind is the JSON utility doesn't handle starting the JSON request with an array. So you'll see here all these start with an object and then some keys, and then they have their data, and you can have arrays inside. But if it starts with an array, you'll have to either wrap it or use a different library like Newtonsoft or something. So I'm not really going to be going over that, but just keep that in mind that you might get an error if you're trying to start with an array. So just keep that in mind. And okay, so we have our request here. And the first thing we're going to do is in the start is we need a function to be able to grab the data from the servers. So we're going to be using a coroutine. I haven't done a mini guide on coroutines. There should be one coming soon. I'm not going to really talk too much about coroutines. We're just going to kind of use one. So if you're new to coroutines, just kind of follow along. Just know that they allow you to execute code asynchronously, where things are happening. It doesn't actually put on another thread, but it allows you to continue your code of execution while this kind of request sort of thing runs. So it's super handy for doing like web requests and stuff. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the JSON data. So we're going to starting with a coroutine, and they return an I enumerator here. Like I said, don't worry about it too much. I will probably have a video discussing coroutines. Just kind of follow along and just know that this kind of doesn't stop your code execution. It kind of just like lets it go off, and asynchronously it'll be like, okay, let me know when you're done, sort of thing. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're also going to bring in an action. Again, I don't have a mini guide on this, but I just thought this tutorial was like super useful for a lot of people. An action is just kind of like a definition for like a function that we're going to pass in. And in this case, we're going to pass in a function that takes in a string parameter. We're going to just call this callback. And you'll kind of link this in a minute when I show you when I create the function itself. It looks very similar. Okay, so in order to call this, we are going to use a thing called start coroutine. Start coroutine only works on mono behaviors, so keep that in mind. And we're going to say start coroutine. We're going to do get JSON data, and then it needs a callback. So we're going to quickly, and I'll make the screen a little bit bigger for you guys. Okay, it's not going to do that. Okay, so we're going to have private void, and we're going to say read JSON data. So the idea is that we would do the request, where we'll fetch it, we'll go get the request, and then once we're done, we're going to call this function in order to process the data. So you'll notice that this action string looks very similar to our function that takes in a string. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to pass in our function that we want to return. So it's saying we're going to start this coroutine, get JSON data. We're going to have a parameter called callback, and when we call callback, it's going to call this function. Super handy. Okay, so let's start out. So we're going to be using Unity's web request. This replaces, if you're old school, this replaces the triple W class. And it's just kind of like their generic wrapper around different web requests, whether you need text or images or whatever. So we're going to have a Unity web request, and it's going to be equal to a Unity web request get. And you'll see they have a bunch of like standard web request versions that people normally use. So whether you're posting or putting data or deleting things, anything you'd kind of do with like a REST API sort of thing. And we're going to be passing in our endpoint. So the idea here is that a Unity web request is going to get what's at the end of this endpoint and return to us in the request. That's going to take some time. So in coroutines, you have yields which say, hey, wait here until I'm done doing this. In this case, we're going to say request.send web request, and it's going to sit there and wait. So wait for the request to come back. And so it's just going to kind of sit there. Like I said, because we're putting this in a coroutine, if I had like a debug.log down here, this is going to fire right after I start the coroutine. So this is just going to kind of wait, but this is always going to continue down, which is super handy. Okay, so after it's done getting the web request, whether it's good or bad, like maybe we got a network error that's like a 404, we're just going to do a quick test to test if there is a network error. If there is one, we'll do a debug.log error, and we're going to put in the request.error. Beautiful. So this is just going to debug us out an error with the error message that's attached to the request. else we can call our callback. So we call our callback like a function here because that's what we're passing in. It requires a string. So we'll say request.download handler. And there's a variety of things in request, by the way. So feel free to have a check over it. Like you can get how many bytes and stuff have been downloaded. Like if you want to do progress bars, that sort of stuff, which is super handy. I'm going to say download handler .text. So give me the text that you downloaded from this endpoint, and we're going to call it and send to this guy here. And then simply in this function, we're just going to debug.log text. And okay, beautiful. So we're going to save that. Go back to Unity, click our code object, and we're going to add in Json Reader, and we're going to hit play. So when we hit play, it's going to request to the server, wait for the data, and you'll notice it comes back like super fast. All right, like it's a small amount of data. But if you get into massive APIs, like not having it in a coroutine will like literally hang up your application. So and you'll notice it comes back as a nice string that we can work with. So this is a string, nothing that we can like dot into like .NET wise. So let's fix that. So when you're looking at this sort of data here, the first thing you want to do is kind of look at the JSON data and be like, how do I map this to a class, okay? And you want to do it like per object based. So the first thing is like, okay, if it's per object base, we have this big object that contains a variable called data, which contains another object of a bunch of different things. So in my mind, that tells me it's two classes at least, right? We're gonna have a class with a variable called data that holds another that's of the type of this class, okay? So let's go and map that out. So we're gonna do data and then of this class. Just for ease, instead of putting its own little CS file, I'm just gonna put it at the bottom of this class. So make sure that you're like still in the namespace, but outside this class. We're gonna do a public class. And I'm just gonna call this single user response data. Beautiful. And like we said, this is gonna be of another class. We haven't defined that, so let's go quickly define that before we continue. Public class user data, right? So this is one user data. So like if I was doing a list of users, you'll notice that this is a list of user data, right? A bunch of user data. So you could make this a list. Okay, and then inside there we had a public int ID, a public string email, and you're like, well, where do you get these types from? Let's just quickly go back here. So you'll see with JSON, it'll wrap the strings in quotes. For numbers, it won't. Keep an eye out. If it has a decimal, you'll probably want that as a float, or if you know there's a chance that it could be a float number. In this case, it looks like they're just all integer values. Also, sometimes you'll run into, with RESTful APIs, they'll return sometimes like a null version of like an int or a date or whatever. That's more of like an advanced thing, but if you ever run into that, you can check out Nullable Types, which looks like, let's see if I can just make one really quick. It'd be like this, where this is a nullable type, so like the server could send us null, and it would be able to handle that. We're not going to talk about that more than what we just did in this video, but if you do find like you're trying to grab from a RESTful API and the ID could be null or something, like check out nullable values. Okay, what do we got here? We got string first underscore name. And the other thing you're going to notice is my variable names have to match what they are called by the key, okay? Even the underscores, the casing, everything. So if someone's giving you full caps back, you gotta make it full caps, okay? All right, so let's put the rest of these in here. We're gonna say last underscore name, and then public string avatar. Beautiful. Okay, so this maps to this object. And then this main object, the response, holds the data of that object. So let's have a public user data, call it data. All right, so this looks very familiar to our JSON object. Beautiful. You're like, all done, let's go. We got one more step. In order to convert the JSON, you have to have it serializable. That's in the system namespace. And that's a little attribute that goes above our class that tells the system when it's trying to parse and convert it that, hey, you know what? This is actually serializable data. And what that means is like things like typical collections, like generic collections, like dictionaries don't really work and convert well. The only one that does actually convert well is the list. So just keep an eye out for that. Don't try to make your data in JSON be like, oh, I'm going to make a dictionary because it maps out perfectly. You're going to start running into issues. Keep it to generic types, with the exception that you could use the list, the generic list as well. And you need this above each class. So we're just going to kind of do that above each class. Beautiful. And now they're ready to go. We've told the compiler that these are serializable and we can do stuff. We can convert them. So in our read JSON data, we're going to create a single user response data called user. And actually, my bad, we're going to do user data. I'm going to do a little bit of a little shortcut, like, because this is kind of weird. Like if I return this object, then I have to go this.data.id just for our sample. It's a little weird. So we're going to return a user data. And we're going to use JsonUtility. From JSON, we're going to be using the generic T version here, which is with your nice less than greater than signs. And our main object's data type. So you're going to pass in the head of this whole thing, like where the first object starts, which is our single user response data. It then wants our string, our JSON string. And then the last thing I'm going to do is, assuming that that would work, I'm going to do a .data to just give us that single user. Like if you're doing a list of users, you might do .data and return a list, because it's kind of, like I was saying before, it's kind of weird to like return this class and then start using it like that. And just to test this out, we're in debug.log here. I'm going to do user.id. See, now we're able to dot into it, right? Because now we have a class. Do user.firstname, user.avatar, which should give us a link here. And okay, so let's go check that out. Clear the console here. And you're going to see that it's going to do our request. And then from there, it's successfully converted to a user data class that we're able to use random, like our standard C# practice on it, and we're just debugging those to the console for now. So to Janet and a nice link there to an image. Okay, so that's basically the gist of JSON data there. Let's go one step further, like I was showing at the start of this video, and let's utilize this link that we got back and put in an image in the middle of the screen. So if you go back to your project here, I'm going to clear the console. I'm going to right click just in the hierarchy here. We're going to go to UI and we're going to select raw image. So when you're using images, those are images that have been like processed and stuff that you brought in here. When you're bringing stuff off the internet and downloading it, you're going to use raw image. And it's going to bring an event system with it, and you can just kind of like leave that alone. You can hit 2D up here and see an image in the top. Zoom out, you'll notice it's not really in the middle of the screen. So what we're going to do is just right click on its transform. You'll see it's a rect transform. If you've never like worked with like the UI too much, just hit reset here. It'll go to the center. So part of our link, you'll see the avatar is 128.jpg. So they'll generally do that terminology if that's like based on the size. So let's just make that 128 for us. And now we need a way to hook this up to the JSON reader. So let's go back to the JSON reader. And underneath our constant, let's have serialized field. Note that this is a different keyword than serializable. A lot of people, like when they first start with this, get those two mixed up. So just, if you're doing like private variables, it's serialized field. If you're doing like JSON classes, it's serializable. And we're going to look for the raw image. It's going to bring in unityengine.ui. And we're just going to call this like avatar. Generically, you might have like a big list of this stuff. This is just kind of showing you an example how to download the image and put it in there as like a bonus thing. Okay, beautiful. So let's go back to Unity. And we'll make sure that we drag raw image into there so it's hooked up now. And we'll save that. And let's use it. So we've read the JSON. We now have the avatar at this state, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to have another request here that's also going to be a coroutine. So private enumerator. And we're going to say get user avatar. So you'll notice images will take way longer than data, and it's going to want a path that it searches for. And this is going to kind of show you kind of two things. You can either do callbacks or you can just kind of do it inside the coroutine. So Unity has done this like awesome thing where they kind of like have a base web request, and then around it they kind of be like web request texture and web request other stuff. And it's super handy because if you're just looking to get a specific, like you're getting a texture, you can kind of just use that version. So we're going to use Unity web request texture dot get texture and path. So this then knows like that we're trying to get an image from this SERP request. We're going to do our yield return request dot send web request. We're going to check if the request came back is a network error, and if so, we can just copy our log right here. Beautiful. And we'll continue. So we have our avatar up here, so we're going to go and we're going to say avatar.texture. So the raw image just requires like a texture, which is kind of cool, and we're going to grab that texture from what we downloaded. So what we're going to do is we're going to say texture 2D, we'll call this texture, is equal to the download, the request download handler. And I just put it in brackets because I'm going to do one more thing after this. I just want to explain, when you use the extended versions, the download handler is going to be a base, so you have to kind of cast it to a specific download handler type. So just know that if you're doing web requests, download handler fits with web requests. If you're doing web request texture, you got to use download handler texture. Just those two kind of go the same. So you'll see there's file, script, buffer, asset bundle, audio clip. There's a ton of them. And we're going to say that this request.download handler is actually casted to download handler texture. And this is the same as writing a request.download handler as that. There's multiple ways to cast stuff. And then we're going to say, and I wrapped the whole thing in parentheses, because then that kind of goes after you cast it, this is your object, and I'm able to continue dotting into things, which is super handy. And I want the texture from it. And you'll see that there's a variety, just like the text, there's a variety of things that come with the download handler. And then, so that gives us a texture, and now we can set the texture to our avatar. And so this now needs to be called. So just like our start coroutine up there, once we've grabbed the avatar here, or grabbed our data, we can start the coroutine, we'll get the avatar, and it's like, hey, what path? I'll say user.avatar. Beautiful. Okay, so everything's hooked up, everything's programmed up. Let's get ready, and we'll hit play. And you'll see that it took a second, right? So it did the data, printed out our like object, and then from there we did a request to get Buddy's image here. And if I just play it again, just like watch the image that comes in, you'll see that it's white and then pops in after like a second and a half. So just keep that in mind. That's why we're doing it in the coroutines and stuff, is just because it doesn't happen right away. You got to wait for the server to return that. You got to download those bytes and convert them, all that sort of stuff, just to get the image. So that's the basic of JSON stuff. Hopefully you guys liked it. Make sure you guys leave a comment, subscribe, all that jazz, and we'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Hey guys, I just wanted to make sure that I give a nice shout out to all my Patreons over on Patreon. And they're going to be in the following list for you: Arthur Zhang, ARVR 2020, Timothy McCoon. Hey everyone, if you guys liked the video, make sure you guys click that subscribe button, give it a like, and make sure to comment. It really helps out. And if you guys are looking to support the project further, I also have my Patreon, which will be linked in the description down below. Thank you, and have a good day.